Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Well, I'm picking up my 7-string guitar, and I'm going to be singing the Crossroad Blues to keep the taints away. I went down by the crossroads, fell down on my knees. I went down to the crossroads, fell down on my knees. Asked the Lord above, have mercy on some poor boy like me, if you please. Went down by the crossroads. Wow, man, that really brings back memories of my years in the rock and roll and good old blues. I just love the blues, and it keeps the taints away. Tim, do you know about the taints?
The Haints, yeah, oh yeah,
Taints, the Haints, yeah.
Well, I started to say now, some of the old people that I knew years ago would call them Haints. Haints, yeah. See, you missed your calling, Tim. You could have been a blues singer there.
Yeah. Well, I let my friends do the singing and the picking at the guitar and the banjo. Although my life has certainly been full of music and witchcraft and the occult and Haints.
And Haints,
Haints misbehaving. Isn't that a song or no? I guess that has nothing to do.
Yeah. Okay, well,
standing at the crossroads, tried to flag a ride. Ah, yeah. Okay.
Now, since you brought that up, rock and roll has been associated, and the blues and some of these other genres of music have been associated with the occult, and some people would say even the devil for quite some time. And you've got a story about how a certain person may have made a deal, so to speak, with the devil for his music ability.
Well, it all kind of started in the 1930s. There was a musician by the name of Robert Johnson, and he was known actually as a terrible guitar player. In fact, he would go into the juke joints down around Mississippi and Louisiana, and the other folks, musicians, would basically tell him not to play because he was so bad. In fact, the audience who had come there for a little bit of gambling and a little bit of moonshine and a little bit of dancing, mainly a black audience, because, of course, there was segregation in those days, would ask him kindly to sit down, and maybe he'd strum a tune or two while the featured musicians were taking a respite or something. But basically, he was just not appreciated as a performer. But then he disappeared. I guess his wife died during labor, and he went off by himself and did not return for about a year and a half. Now, he came back one night. He walked into the juke joint, and everybody was kind of whispering behind his back, look who's here. Robert Johnson is back, and he's carrying that guitar that he can't play. And he kind of begged him to be allowed to sing a song. And he took an extra string and and tied it up there on his guitar neck, and he had a 7-string guitar, which nobody had ever seen anybody play before,
Hmm.
and he wailed. It was a different person altogether. Robert Johnson had come back from the Mississippi Delta to be an excellent guitar player and songwriter. Now, I think he only did 27 songs, and of course, he has known, and as the legend goes, that he met the devil down by the crossroads, and the devil took made an agreement with him for his soul that he could return and be an expert musician, which he was. Now, I don't know how good of a deal it was just between you and me, uh, Tim, because I believe Mr. Johnson died at the age of 27. But the myth goes on, and of course there are many versions of his songs, including the Rolling Stones and the band Cream. I guess everybody has covered Robert Johnson, and it's a legend down by the crossroad that everybody in the music business knows about. And you might kind of laugh at it and spoof it, but everybody just wonders, how did that man wander out into the Mississippi Delta and come back such an expert blues man? It boggles the mind.
Hmm. So
And so that's the beginning. Yeah, that's the beginning of rock and roll and the occult, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, that's where it all started, and there are of course many musicians who have been into the occult, including Led Zeppelin, and the list goes on and on. David Bowie. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say. So while Robert Johnson was not able to really enjoy the fruits of his deal that long, his music though has managed to become immortal through everybody else's covers.
Well, it has indeed, and there's always been this connection between rock and roll and some would say Satanism, but that's kind of overblown. Every garage band or heavy metal band that mentions the devil has to be Satan, which Satanists, but and that's totally absurd. I'm sure there are some Satanists who have their own rock and roll band, but it's become a gimmick in the I guess in the music business, and you played your Beatles records backwards, and
Oh yeah.
you got all kinds of messages, and I guess that's called masking, is it? You play your Beatles records,
Back
and
backward
yeah,
masking.
yeah, and so you got your connection right there, and of course every fundamentalist minister from here to the Mississippi Delta. Well, they were the ones that it was the ministers, the Baptist ministers for the most part, who were totally against music of any form,
Right.
and certainly opposed to dancing. Dancing has always been sinful because, like Elvis knew, you wiggle your hips and the women come a running.
So this leads to you have a new book called David Bowie, UFOs, Witchcraft, Cocaine, and Paranormal. Now, a lot of people know you only as Mr. UFO. Your interest in
Small-minded,
UFOs.
small-minded. They're small-minded.
But you have a pretty rich history when it comes to rock and roll, especially there on the East Coast and in New York. How did you get involved in all of that?
Well, it goes back to I don't know exactly how old I was, but let's say 10 or 12 years old, and I had heard the music of Little Richard. Now, Little Richard was or became a minister, but if you know Little Richard and have seen pictures of Little Richard and saw him performed and listened to his music, you know that Little Richard was no saint by any means. He had wore lipstick and makeup and kind of flaunted his uh, personality and played songs that were very risque in nature. And one could see why the Baptist minister was opposed to songs like Good Golly, Miss Molly, Sure Like the Ball, Tutti Frutti. Now, there's an innocent enough song. It's about candy, right?
That's what I always thought.
Oh yeah, Trudy Fruity Oh Rudy, yeah.
Uh-huh.
So I liked the music with the beat when I was a youngster, and you know it was pretty difficult to get music like that. You had to put in an advanced order because it was considered black music. To be honest with
Mm,
you, I mean
right.
that's what it was, and most record stores didn't carry anything like that. It was maybe they had Bill Haley and the Comets. Now there's a real rock and roller.
Mhm.
How about the Big Bopper? Chantilly lace and a pretty face and a phony tail hanging down. Wiggle as I walk, giggle as she talk. Lord makes the world go round. Yeah. Okay, but for the most part, it wasn't easy to get music. You had to put your request in and wait around. So I think the first album that I had my mom buy for me was Little Richard, and I became a huge fan. And then later on, when I became a teenager in my late teens, and I started commuting from New Jersey over to Manhattan, I would go down to Greenwich Village and would stalk some of the little clubs that existed. I call them bohemian clubs, but bohemians were kind of on the way out. That was before the hippies, I guess, just before the poets and things like that.
Right.
And there were some really fantastic musicians who were just starting to perform in public. Musicians like Jimi Hendrix and I would go in at night, and for a couple of drinks, you could sit around till 3 or 4 in the morning, and maybe go to even an after-hours bar if you knew the password to get through past the doorman. And it was exciting, and it was new, and it was energizing. That's the way I could describe it. But my real entrance into the world of rock and roll is a backstage gadfly. I guess you could say it took place. I was walking down Second Avenue in Lower Manhattan in Greenwich Village in the East Village, and I was passing the Fillmore East, which was 6th Street and Second Avenue. That was, of course, the place for rock and roll in the '60s. Promoter Bill Graham had all the big acts there, and I stopped on the corner to listen to the sound of the music coming out the back door, which was open to the theater because that's where the musicians brought in and the road crew brought in all their equipment, and the stage was there, so you were actually kind of backstage even while you were on the sidewalk. And there happened to be a member of a well established motorcycle club standing there doing security. He later became a friend. His name was Fat Joe. And we got to talking, which is something that normally you wouldn't think that somebody from a motorcycle club would do with somebody passing on the street, but we seemed to have the music and in common. And we got into a little discussion, and Joe says to me, "Care to go in?" I
Hmm.
said, "Go in," and he said, "Yeah, just go backstage, you know." So I went backstage, and it was Black Sabbath playing, and
Hmm.
I listened to the music, and I ended up just going to just about every show as a reporter. Of course, I was working for a couple of newspapers. Then one was the Manhattan Gazette, and I convinced the publisher to let me do a music column. Now, she terribly hated everything in life, as far as I can remember, and certainly did not like rock music. But I guess she figured, well, maybe it'll appeal to a different demographic. So I got my friend Helen Hovey, who is a photographer. In fact, many of her photographs are in the book, the David Bowie UFOs, Witchcraft, Cocaine, and Paranoia. And we started to attend all the concerts. Now, the Fillmore East closed around that time. I know, probably within a year after I went backstage here to see Black uh, Sabbath, but um, the music went on a couple of blocks away up on 14th Street in an old opera house that
Hmm.
was built like in 1860 or something, that had was absolutely glamorous when it first opened. But by this time, I think it was showing porno movies, and it held 3,600 people in three different levels.
Wow.
Orchestra, balcony, upper tier. So it was huge, but it's kind of in disrepair. Obviously, in 100 or so years, nobody had really taken care of it. But a gentleman by the name of Howard Stein came along and made a deal with the owners of the building. And every weekend, or just about every weekend on a Friday or Saturday night, they would put on a concert. There were two shows. One at I think it started at 8 o'clock in the evening, and another one that began at around 11 o'clock. And we're talking about bands that were bands. I mean, just Traffic and Fleetwood Mac. Just tremendous music. And I became, because I was working for the rock magazines and doing a column for the Manhattan Gazette, Helen and I became friendly with the promoter and with people that were working there. There was a young lady who worked the front office for Howard by the name of Lila Schulman. And she was interested in the occult. In fact, I did I think, a reading for her and helped her find a ring that she had lost. And she said there was a lady that she wanted to introduce Helen and I to. It was a gal by the name of Wally Elmlark, who was the White Witch of New York, and she wrote a column for the British publication, a Melody Maker, and for the a magazine here in this country called Circus. Circus was kind of a glossy version of Rolling Stone, but without the politics. It
Hmm.
was all about the pop star of the day, and she had befriended many of the rock musicians who showed a great deal of interest in the occult. In fact, she introduced me to David Bowie, and he had an experience or two. Well, he was fascinated by the occult, everything from Aleister Crowley to the Tree of Life. In fact, in the book, we publish a number of photographs from his private collection of him actually drawing examples on the I think on the floor of the Tree of Life, which he was captivated with. But he had also run into a problem with that white powder known as cocaine.
Mm-hmm.
And he had gotten terribly paranoid. In fact, at one point, he believed, and there's some reason to say that this was true, that the swimming pool of the house that he had bought in Los Angeles was possessed by an evil spirit. And in fact, the water in the pool would bubble by itself. And there was even an impression of something that looked satanic in the bottom of the pool. He also believed that witches were coming to collect his semen in order to create the Antichrist. So you could see he was just doing a little bit too much of that cocaine, and he needed help, and I guess he realized that. So a friend of David's by the name of Cherry Vanilla, who was a poet. I knew her, a beautiful red-haired gal. I guess she was in her early 20s at that point, but then weren't we all? And she knew Wally, and she got Wally in touch with David, and Wally did a spell, or gave him the words to do a spell, I think it was, and they performed a spell or two with candles and all, and managed to get rid of the demon, both in the pool in his home and outside of L.A., and the demons, I guess, that were trying to possess his soul. So she was a great personality, a very attractive woman. She had long black hair with a green streak in it. She was kind of goth before there was goth. And she was very energetic and very positive about witchcraft. Like Maria, she only believed in using the occult for good. So she befriended a lot of the rock and roll performers. And I was introduced, Helen and I were introduced to her by Lila Schulman, and we met her backstage at the Academy of Music with its 3,600 paying attendees, and some of the best music in the world that will never be created again today. Not with the sorry state of music, as far as I'm concerned. You don't have bands like Traffic and Cream, and it was sensational, and people who lived through that era will appreciate what I'm saying. But there was a direct connection between rock and roll and the occult that was growing. And at about that time, I had just formed one of the first metaphysical schools in the country. It was the New York School of Occult Arts and Sciences. And believe it or not, we were only about 3 or 4 avenues away from the Academy of Music. So some of the musicians that played at the Academy would come on up to the Occult Center. In fact, there's a photo in the book that Helen took of Dr. John McRavenack, the night tripper from New Orleans. And he came up to the Occult Center in his complete voodoo garb, is the best way I could describe it, and did a spell with his oils and a blessing or two. And there's a great photo of him in the book. And I first saw him, in fact, on a show with Jimi Hendrix outside at Randall's Island.
Tim, we're almost out of time here. What's the name of the book again?
Oh, come on. Out of time.
Out of time. Well, and the book is David Bowie, UFOs, Witchcraft, Cocaine, and Paranoia.
And find me on Facebook, man, and we'll chat. Just type in Tim Beckley, and God bless you all. And we'll all go down to the crossroads, as long as we can keep the haints away, because you got to set out on that gravestone, and they'll come out at night and teach you how to play.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre. with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on exploring the bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100, exploring the bizarre.